Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to those who I've not said Happy New Year to. We can still say that as far as I'm concerned until the end of January. In terms of apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Baton and Councillor Priest. We have Councillor Kane joining us on Teams today.
Welcome to you on Teams. Declarations of interest. None declared. Chairman's remarks. I've only one thing worth saying. Kathy Baton, Councillor Baton from Dudley, who was the chair before me, has had to tender her resignation from the committee. She's become chair of the Fire Authority, and my understanding is it's running her off her feet, and there's meeting diary clashes and all kinds of things. And as I don't want my house burning down, I'm very glad that she but it's a personal level, and I think we all would agree she was a really superb chair, and we will miss her. Minutes of the 25th of November. I think we have one correction. Councillor Lumbey, you were there and you're not recorded as being there, is that right? If we could make that addition, that would be helpful.
Will be.
Otherwise, are members comfortable with the minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you. Somebody coming? It is. I'm sorry, I'm just going to delay. Are you okay if we just wait 2 minutes? We've got a substantive recommendation, and if we wait till Philip Baton turns up, we will be quorate.
Apologies for lateness.
No, that's fine. Shall we? If people grab a copy, why don't you grab a copy?
Thank you.
Made that mistake.
We'll just adjourn for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't there at 10.
It then became apparent that our review had already been put in place, which you will have had in your documents, which is this thing here, is it called the Lister report? Thomas Lister report, yes. And so rather than ask for a review, the change in the recommendations is, please will officers just check with some key known and trusted developers that this actually simplifies the process for them. I am not I mean, I've read them. I have no idea whether these are good ideas or not. But there again, I'm not applying for millions of pounds worth of grants. So the other recommendations remain the same as in your paper. Does anybody have any questions? I'm very pleased to say we've got Ian Martin, isn't it? Who's able to answer questions on the Lister report if you'd like.
Thank you, Chair. I was just with the new government white paper coming across on devolution. Is there anything in that that's going to affect the recommendations at all?
That'd be a fairly easy one. The answer is I'm not sure. No, I don't believe there is. So the land funds, if you want to give them that badge that we've got, will be slightly changed under integrated settlement. That's likely to have the biggest impact. But we'll be moving to integrated settlement, and we're just working through with MHCLG what that will mean. The likelihood is, because we've got an existing pipeline on, especially on the brownfield infrastructure and land fund, which is one of the four, and that will roll over. We're already committed to projects in terms of discussions with developers. So likely for the short term anyway, same criteria will apply for application. We'll deal with the pipeline because those are the conversations we've had with developers.
Councillor Waters.
Wrong one. It's me, that is. Thank you, Chair. Our portfolio holder of housing has actually spoken to some developers, and they've actually said there will be a few issues for them regarding this. I believe it's the actual increase of social housing when they're actually building. So they're going to have issues with not being able to have as many to sell and to buy to let and so forth. So there is going to be issues with the builders. Thank you.
So currently, we have got an aspiration that 20% of anything that we fund via grant would be either affordable or social. It's not completely in stone that, but that's what we set our stall out whenever we talk to a developer. There's no change in that as a result of that. There is, of course, a regional aspiration. Certainly, one of the mayor's priorities is have more social homes being built, but that will impact on our current grants as they stand. So the developers' fears are a little unfounded. We'll try and correct that when we're talking to people in the market, but that's the message we give them.
If I could just clarify that, under the new MPPF, if a site is greenbelt, there is a requirement for 50% unless there is a local plan, I think, that says otherwise.
Yes.
I think that might be what Councillor
Yes.
Waters is talking about. If you have a brownfield site that is in greenbelt, do you know what the answer is
Right,
yet?
well, then,
Or is this just too complex and would you like to go away and think about it?
I can do my best to answer it. There's 2 points there. It shouldn't be possible to have a brownfield site in greenbelt, as the two are contradictory. I know we've established grey belt as a new term. Haven't come across that situation. Really looking forward to that particular one. If that arises, thanks for reminding me that could be there. But I will deal with that at the time. So our funds specifically apply to brownfield, i.e. there has been a previous use. So for example, an airfield may be under that category, but I wouldn't have thought, unless it's been disused for some time, it would be classified as greenbelt because it would have had a use. Your second point about, or your first point you made, second point on MPPF, that is out with our grant policy. So first and foremost, the developer has to comply with the planning law. That is what they have to do. The local authorities are responsible for that. We have no intervention on what local authorities decide is right or wrong over their planning permissions. So they'll have to accord with that. So there shouldn't be any undue influence in terms of WMCA on that.
Yes, I think I understand. So if the local authority has got a requirement for 30%, for planning purposes, they might require that for 30%. You'd be happy on 20, you'd still be happy on 30.
I'd be delighted on 30. Yeah. But yeah, the local planning authority works hopefully in consultation, but independently to us in terms of what they're determining. It is probably going too far here, so apologies, but the complexity starts to come with if the planning authority determines 20% under the Section 106 agreement on a planning permission. My understanding is the registered providers that would most likely buy that wouldn't be eligible for the grant from Homes England. So sometimes it works out that it's a little bit less, and then developers can choose to do more, and then they can pick up the grant. Equally, a local authority could insist on 20%, and has had been the case where developers built 100% affordable. The registered providers able to claim the grant on all of those that are in the Section 106.
Councillor Tennant.
Yeah, it's just a somewhat technical. The report calls on us to accept the recommendations of the Thomas Lister review. There's no full set of recommendations I could spot within that review. So I just want to be 100% sure what we're endorsing. Is it just the reports, the slideshow as a whole, that's attached as Appendix 2, or is it a specific set of recommendations produced by Thomas Lister?
Just trying to find the paragraphs. We're not endorsing Thomas Lister. What we're saying is please go away and check with developers that that's okay and that's going to meet your lists. And then we've got our own, I think there were 4 other recommendations on there. I can't.
Yeah, which would be the same as before.
Yeah, they are the same as before. So we're not actually endorsing it. We're merely saying, please can you check that this meets with developers' needs to simplify the process?
Okay.
Because what we don't want them doing is complicating the process.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Can I give some reassurance, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
So in order to address that specific point, I've got a list in front of me. I don't expect you to have it, of all of the points summarised in the Thomas Lister report and what we're doing against them. I won't bore you with the entire list, but it's my checklist that I'm going through to make sure we're actioning it. If we actually asked unfiltered a developer what they would like from our grant programme, they would like a cheque sent to them the next day with nothing, with no accountability. So of course they would like that. So we have to put a little filter on it. So I'm fairly new to this, but I come from a developer background. I also come from a development financing background and a property consultancy background. So when I'm talking to developers, I can kind of understand what they want, because I come from the industry. So I'm putting my own filter on it to check and balance. To me, I've employed a consultant, a chap called Steve George. He's worked predominantly at Halifax Bank of Scotland, then at Lloyds Bank, but interestingly, he then ran what's called Housing Growth Partnership, which is equity backing for developers. They supported house builders. So he's got great knowledge of what the house builders want, particularly in the SME space, which is kind of interesting rather than the major builders. So he's been helping on the Thomas Lister review as well of making sure that we've got the right point. Sorry, I have got it on. I'm obviously not close enough to it. Apologies.
Thank you for that clarification. I've got 3 now. Councillor McKay, followed by Councillor Waters, followed by Councillor Kettle. However, I've been told to remind you, if you want to talk about the contents of the report, we're going to have to go into private session, because at the moment it's still confidential.
Moves Mike closer to self. Just on the sort of grey belt terminology, and I do share your sort of interest in how it's going to be defined. I did come across once, not in this area, whereas if you imagine like an industrial park that had a green sort of strip of grass in the middle of it that through some anomaly was classified as greenbelt, even though the surrounding area was clearly an industrial park. Now, the council actually took a remarkably unusual, sensible solution when anything was needed on that and just reclassified it. But I can only presume the industrial park must have been there prior to anything being classified as greenbelt, and therefore anything green within that area suddenly became greenbelt, even though clearly it wasn't. The 2 questions I've got, which I think aren't going to take us into private session. One of which was, what sort of definition are we using for affordable housing? Because there's a few floating around at the moment. And the other one was just that thing on enforcement of the percentages, 20, 30%. Quite often come across developments that, everyone's very proud we're going to have a 30% social housing on here. Then you look at what comes out at the end of the sausage tube at the end of the day, is nowhere near that. Sometimes it's 15%, sometimes it's 10 or below. And there's always really good reasons why this happens, because the house builder's having to take on some other form of onerous thing that therefore means, okay, we can let that slide. But, you generally look at the end of the year and the amount of social housing or affordable housing is being built is not actually what it looked like it was going to be at the beginning. If all these targets were going to be enforced. So I was just wondering how much of an enforcement criteria are we going to put on this? Thanks, Chair.
2 points. So one about definition. So far, I haven't been in post covering as interim for very long, but we've applied the national definition because according with our own, it also brings us into alignment with grants available from Homes England under the Affordable Housing Programme. So it seems eminently sensible, with the definition being discounted by 20% to market. We are taking a case by case review about what does that really mean on affordability, because if your market rent is £2,000 per month, applying a 20% discount might be technically correct, but is that actually affordable in our parlance? In sort of, you know, what would that appear to be on to the man on the street? So in many cases, we're guided by the local planning authorities, the local authorities' view on it, and talking to them and discussing it with them is important, which we do pre-panel by talking to them anyway, but also investment panel. So anything going to investment board is advised by the investment panel, consisting of local authority officers as well. I'm hoping that gets towards answering that question. Secondly, on the amount of social housing or affordable housing, again, that really is a local planning authority decision about what they would put on. We're administering a grant programme to try and make gap funding. So largely we are led, well, almost fully we are led by the local planning authority.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Councillor Walters.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to know if you're aware of the Cannockshade sack. The Cannockshade sack, because Walsall, part of Walsall, and there might be other boroughs, was actually in Staffordshire. So there was some document that was put together when Walsall, part of Walsall, was part of Staffordshire, and just recently, Cannock Council have actually, well, Cannock Council, Staffordshire Council have came across, and actually, so when a builder goes to build, they've not just got 106 money to contend with, they also have the Cannock Chase staff. They get asked by Staffordshire County Council to actually put funding in for that. Would that affect them getting any funding that's available? Thank you.
Well, it's simply no, I'm not aware of this. When we look at development appraisal, though, for any project, we take account of any other amounts of money coming in. So if the underline is there's another positive figure that comes in before our grant, yeah, that would adjust the profit level. So we make sure that we are genuinely gap funding. So it should account for other public money going in, whatever the source as well, in terms of determining what is the real gap.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Kettle.
Thank you. Just two aspects to that. Obviously, 106 money has been mentioned on several occasions, but didn't we go over to SIL money? People look at me blank, you know, and I thought SIL had superseded 106. Are they still around, both in parallel?
It depends. It depends on the area. So SIL does community infrastructure levy does apply in some areas, but not in all areas. But it does a very similar thing. It's supposed to be a simpler form for the local authority to take out money from a developer to fund the infrastructure. Both of them do similar things, but SIL was brought in, I believe, to make it easier for a developer to understand rather than have to negotiate Section 106. They are doing very similar things, but SIL only applies in some areas.
Yeah, they did make it geographical, and it turned out to be very difficult to spend, actually, the SIL money. You know, that was the trouble with it. They've had to amend it. And the other thing is that when you get a large builder move into the area, they often bring their own infrastructure, and, you know, they come in mass and scale and do an awful lot of work very quickly. And I'm just wondering whether some of the applications couldn't go in as joint applications. You know, would that get around things, get things moving quicker?
You're possibly right. So I think you're referring to a developer making an application for infrastructure off-site as well as on-site, i.e. the dwellings. Mm-hmm. It really is I mean, there's a danger with the combined authority that it oversteps its mark. We should not overstep our mark when it's local authorities' decisions. So local authorities should handle the planning system, which they do. We haven't strayed into that territory. I don't believe it's part of our remit. I imagine I know a lot of local authority leaders would definitely agree with that statement.
Thank you. I mean, I tend to be a bit of a nerd on planning. Section 106 payments are specifically for things that are directly associated with the planning application. So if you need a new roundabout to give access, then that's section 106. If you need an enhancement to things in the borough, because the borough is getting bigger with more people, then that tends to be SIL money. Section 106 has got to be very, very specifically tied to the site. But SIL is a broader.
Not everywhere's covered by SIL either.
What you cover by SIL and what you don't cover by SIL, there is some flexibility in the local authority. So brownfield sites in my borough, for example, do not attract SIL, and neither does affordable housing. But I think that's national, isn't it? Affordable housing can't. But brownfield sites are not SIL chargeable in my local authorities. There's obviously some flexibility around where you charge SIL and the rates at which you charge it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as I'm aware, in Birmingham, SIL is only charged Sutton Coldfield, Edgbaston, and there's another area for the early areas.
White Patch.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it's there's a big chunks of Brum doesn't, so it's got to be 106, otherwise there's nothing going to happen. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've maybe strayed off the specific. But sometimes these things are worth understanding because the combined authority spends a lot of money on this area, and for people to understand it is, I think, helpful. Can I move that we accept the recommendations and pass these on to the board? The recommendations as shown in agenda item 5. Is everybody content with that?
Seconded.
Agreed.
Yeah, do you want to have?
Yeah. Thank you. Ian, this was the only.
If I've got work to do, better go and do it. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
We'd like you to go and build some more housing, please.
Yeah. Don't get my prowl out. I'll see you later.
If we can move on to item 6, the English devolution white paper, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This item, and you'll see the executive summary of the white paper is included in your, rather than the full report. But this is, as you say, the English devolution white paper, which was published just before Christmas, so last month, and has long been trailed and was finally published. And really, the purpose of it being on the agenda for this meeting is to make sure as members you're aware of it. You have an opportunity to read the executive summary. We can provide the full 100+ page document if members wish to see that, but the executive summary is within you. And so that you're aware of it and can start thinking about the implications for the combined authority broadly, but also for overview and scrutiny more specifically. And your sister committee, the Transport Scrutiny Committee, had the paper signing last Monday when it met. A couple of points I just want to flag up initially for you, and it's in respect, obviously, given the remit of this committee, it's in respect of governance and accountability. And I think there's lots to be encouraged by in the white paper, in the view that the government is taking over the importance of overview and scrutiny within combined authorities. And there are sections within there where it talks about specifically strengthening the scrutiny function. Worth pointing out, and a temptation, we had this last Monday, is always to try and get into the detail of what exactly that means. Obviously, it is a white paper. It is written in a broad context rather than what this specifically means for your committee specifically. but it uses lots of phrases like strengthening overview and scrutiny committee, enhancing the transparency of combined authorities, building the capacity of you as scrutiny members individually, but also scrutiny committees, and therefore over the coming year, as the white paper evolves into a devolution bill, there will be a lot of work of which you as a committee will be involved in, and particularly the chair and vice chair, around what do those expressions like strengthening scrutiny committees, enhancing transparency, building capacity, what do they actually mean, and how will that be taken forward within the combined authority. Similarly, there's lots in there about transport, and we talked a bit with transport scrutiny members last week about this. So at the moment, as I say, it's a white paper. There's a lot in there, 100 plus pages. The policy team here at the Combined Authority are currently looking through, doing a sort of line by line assessment. And Jonathan, who sat at the end of the row, welcome to chip in if you want anything to add, because you're very much involved in that work. But looking at what it means potentially for the Combined Authority for transport, for Midlands, for scrutiny committees, that's a piece of work I think that's going on this month and next month. And then I think the intention will be that as we have more detail, as the government's thinking around what this will actually mean in more detail evolves during the course of the year, very much involve of this committee and members in briefing sessions as we start to put the meat on the bone. So for the purposes of this meeting, put it on the radar. You've got the summary document there to read and be familiar with, and then I think this will be a reoccurring item during the course of the year. As we get the detail and we start to think as members of the scrutiny committee as to how we're actually going to utilise these proposed new powers to hold the mayor and the combined authority board to account for the increased powers that the combined authority itself has. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Tennant.
Thank you. Being the nerd I am, the full document was my Christmas reading. So there's obviously a load in there about combined authorities themselves that we can go into detail. But my question's around the wider local government reorganisation, shifting borders, which is obviously going to have fundamental impacts on non-constituent members. But I want to know, because there was some hints of it in the statement by the minister, but whether there's any discussions about the expansion of combined authorities borders, particularly this combined authority in this relevance.
That might be one for me. So the answer to that, I think the leaders all met with the mayor on Friday, and as I understand it, there is no current intention to change the geographical boundaries of the West Midlands Combined Authority. What it means for some of our two-tier neighboring authorities and for non-constituent membership with the combined authority, we are looking at that now, and obviously that will depend upon what sort of the districts in the county, if there's unitarization in Warwickshire. I don't know, Staffordshire as well. So I think we are not the first mover in this space. I think we'll wait and see how the two-tier authorities respond, come together, and then what that means for non-con membership. But at the moment, there is no discussion to change the boundaries of our combined authority.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments at this stage? I mean, it is going to have some fairly fundamental change. I mean, if nothing else, we get Kathy Baton back because it looks like the file is going to go. But there are some interesting things in there which will have some nuances. Like it's proposing it goes to simple majority voting on the board. Currently, it's qualified majorities for most of it, which tends to create a sense of ownership for the decisions across all the local authorities. That might end up us having to do some of the challenge that otherwise would be done to get everybody on board with a majority vote in future. So there are some implications in this which are quite subtle, I think.
Sorry, just to comment, I mean, this is a hugely important document. And I think we will be responding as a combined authority. It's not a consultation, it's a white paper. So it definitely sets out the direction of travel. But just to be very clear, it will mean some potentially very big changes, both to the combined authority and probably then to the role of scrutiny. As Dan mentioned, the team are doing a very good job at the moment going through the document and trying to pull out very clearly what are the implications for our combined authority. And I'm sure that when that's ready, we would be happy to share that with scrutiny members as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we just need to note this, don't we, and move on. Thank you, Dan. So we're now going to move on to the integrated settlement, which in a way is directly linked. Jonathan, is that you? Yes. Thank you.
And the water. Oh, you were coming for me then.
Councillor goes.
Like proper special forces. Coming over. I was going to say that.
Thank you very much, Deb, and good morning all. So the item you have in your agenda listed as number 7 on the integrated settlement. What we wanted to cite yourselves on as committee members is where we are at in the process as the combined authority in preparing for and ultimately delivering the integrated settlement, which is a term you might have heard before, but it basically means as of the 1st of April this year, we will receive so far around £360 million worth of funding. That is not all new funding into a single pot arrangement, which will replace in the region of between 20 and 30 individual grants from different departments. So we are going to have a consolidated range of funding streams for local transport, for employment and adult skills, for retrofitting buildings, for housing and regeneration, and for local growth and place and business support. So we in Greater Manchester are the only areas of England that will be benefiting from this arrangement from April, but in the English devolution white paper, the government explains that this type of reform will be coming to other areas from 2026 onwards. So we are, as they call it, trailblazing the implementation. So there's been quite a lot of preparation underway within the combined authority, within local authorities in preparation for the 1st of April. What this specific paper tries to explain is that now on the 14th of March at WMCA board, we will present to leaders the functional strategies that will explain how we are as a region going to invest and prioritise the resources that we get to achieve a set of outcomes that we are still in the process of negotiating with government. But the functional strategies are basically, here is how we propose to deliver the outcomes and spend the money, basically. So they are our kind of delivery plans for the integrated settlements. Now, they, in most instances, are not starting from scratch. So we have an existing employment and skills strategy. We have an existing local transport plan. We have the plan for growth and business growth West Midlands. So in many instances, with the exception of potentially housing and regen and retrofit, this is doing more of the same direction of travel that we have been on for a while. But we thought it would be helpful to explain and to write down what the plan is for what we're going to do with the integrated settlement. So at the same meeting now on the 14th of March, we are also going to present WMCA board with a number of kind of funding decisions that need to be formally taken. So if the functional strategies explain, here's how we're going to invest, the constitution means that where we are taking decisions of over £20 million, that we need to either secure board approval. And there are a number of instances where there are specific decisions needed from board, for example, on the quantum of money that's involved in retrofits, and for example, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund allocation that we received from Christmas. So that will now accompany this paper going to board on 14th of March. There are some particular funding streams, funding decisions that aren't needed. For example, last year we secured support for the approach to spending skills funding, but as well as the strategy, we're also going to present the specific funding decisions as well. And then also on the agenda for that meeting, we are going to give leaders an update on the development of place-based strategies. So if you envisage that, the functional strategies say here is how across the region we are going to spend the funding. So on bus routes across the region, on colleges across the region, on homes and retrofit across the region. What the place-based strategies will do, which have been developed by local authorities, they will say, here are the specific challenges and opportunities in my area, and here is how I need the integrated settlement to dock into them and support them, so we can start to address problems in a joined up way by doing lots of things in parallel. So there has been a very collaborative effort between this combined authority and local authorities who have been leading the development of their place-based strategies, and we will be giving board an update on where that work has got to do at that time as well. We won't be asking board to sign off each individual place-based strategy. They are for local authorities, but we do want to update board on where that work has got to. So I hope that's a helpful summary. There is some financial information in the report towards the back that summarises what we know from government to date about the quantum and the funding lines for the integrated settlement. The one key piece of information that's missing is the actual outcomes that we're going to be responsible for delivering. We are still negotiating them with government, having tested leaders on proposal back in November. But once we do that, we'll have a degree of sense of where we need to get to and roughly the plans that we need to get there. So I hope that's helpful for now. And I think, Chair, we discussed earlier, we'd be happy to bring the actual functional strategy draft back to the 3rd of March meeting. I think your next meeting is, they are probably, they're a couple of pages long each, so they might be kind of 30 to 40, 50 pages. Maybe we will try and keep them as short as possible, but we can bring the actual substantive documents back for yourselves in due course. But hopefully that's helpful, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. This is the first time I've actually seen it written down in this, I'm going to say simple way, simple enough for me to understand anyway, that in essence, there's two pillars in this. There's the region-wide pillar, and there is a very much a location-based element, and the two mesh together. I found that quite helpful. Councillor Mackay, I think you had the first question.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for the report. So if I understand it, we had government funding 1, which is, you put it that way, where we had all these separate little pots and they all got their money, and now we've got government funding 2.0, which is just one huge amount of cash, and then we allocated to those pots ourselves. How, I don't want to come across really cynical here, but if this was me and I was central government, if you're going to give someone hundreds of millions of pounds or whatever we're going to get, it's a great way to top slice about 20 million off the top, and everyone goes, wow, look at this, I've given everyone all this money. And then when we actually then come to put it out, we suddenly find out we've got less than we had before, but everyone's running around outside going, wow, look at all this money we've got, it's more than we've ever had before. So how confident are you that we are at least going to be no worse off than we were before? And the second bit is just inside our own governance. Is there concern with all these people who before had a nice ring-fenced few £1 million to go off and do their thing, to suddenly find that we internally make a decision to go, we've now got this huge pot of money, and actually this is really important to us, we're going to put it over there, and some people are going to think, like, or quite rightly may think, that they've been shortchanged here now, and say their £10 million is only 8 million or less, and they're feeling that they've been let down, or the losers is another way of putting it, I suppose.
Thank you. Two good questions. On the second one, the funding we get from government will still be attached to achieving certain outcomes with it. So, for example, and I know these are quite unfavourable intervention risks, but if we were given £100 million and we had to build 100 houses, for example, we could only really move that funding around to then invest in not houses if we could still deliver 100 houses, if that makes sense. So in effect, it's not a kind of free lunch where we can move the funding around as we see fit. We will still have to, for example, say to the housing department, we can still deliver what you've given us this specific block of funding for, and it would be the same for education. So if we say we are going to, reduce the number of people without qualifications by 10,000, and you are given, 140 million pounds for that, then we still have to achieve that. So the ability for us to move things around is it's not fully constrained, but there are some constraints on it still. I think over the next 5 years, as we kind of find our feet with this reform, I think we will want to kind of evaluate where we can do these types of things more and exercise more local choice. But I hope that's helpful in terms of there will still be people who need to do specific things, for example. But the beauty is more within the actual pillars. So we will have more choice over how we would then reduce the number of people without qualifications, more choice about how we would then deliver homes. It's not just about building homes, but you need to regenerate the areas and maybe build infrastructure. So actually I think the greatest degree of choice is almost like within the targets you've got, because you can then, fewer different routes to then delivering them, reflecting what the West Midlands situation is. And on the first question about ultimately are we getting more or less, I think the answer is broadly we are getting the same amount, but if you look at it as a percentage of the West Mid share of the budgets, because obviously when the Chancellor came in and said, we need to, potentially lock, tens of billions of pounds worth of public funding, that is going to affect and is affecting some of the budgets we receive. So, for example, we get, I think it's £3.5 million less for the education budget and for free courses for jobs. Now, the share that the West Midlands get is exactly the same as before. It's about 9.4% of the total budget. But because central government has reduced the national budget line, we get less. So we can never do anything about that in terms of our local negotiation. We can negotiate formula in some instances. I think there is only one particular small fund where it looks like in terms of the share we get, there's a kind of percentage share reduction. But I think for that one, we've said to government we need to renegotiate that formula for next year. So that will be part of the evidence that's presented to board on the 14th as part of the budget. And then here's how we are compared to what we would otherwise get. So the answer is that we are basically just about as better off, the same as we were in terms of the shares of budgets. If that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
But that will be what we present to board on the 14th as well.
Kate, I think you have a comment.
Thank you, Ted. Ultimately, it's the principle of no detriment. So it's a key principle that's written into the MOU between us and government, which ensures that we are effectively not worse off from being in the integrated settlement than if we had stayed outside of the integrated settlement and continued our existing regime with as Jonathan says, there's the element around actually taking the same share of the national pot that's in there, which is important. There's more qualitative factors as well around actually we are getting set allocations in some respects out of funds that we would have previously had to competitively bid in for. So we have surety and certainty that means we can kind of get in straight away and make those interventions rather than having to invest capacity and capability into writing business cases, to go into government, etc. To do that. So, but no detriment is the principle we've signed to with government.
Thank you, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Question on retrofit. Now, on the 15th of January, cleaner heating market mechanism came into force. So that means I want all the heating to be pumped heat source rather than using gas boilers. Is there any funding coming forward yet to actually cover that, to start to actually implement it on such as social housing and what have you? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So it's a good technical question. I might have to go away and come back with an answer. My understanding is that we, through the integrated settlement, will receive, I think it's in the region of £167 million over 3 years for retrofits. The types of, so how you would then retrofit a property, one of the solutions might be around a heat pump. So in some ways, the development of the market mechanism, which will largely, in some ways, hopefully reduce the cost of heat pumps by standardising the market, enabling it to, common standards and so on. That in some ways would reduce the cost of that measure. It might bring it in scope of what we could support through some through the interventions we can fund, because there are lots of different ways you could benefit a home, as we all know. Clean heat being one specific one. So in some ways it should be helpful, but I don't think there would be any funding specifically for that market mechanism. It's almost the money that we get enables us to do that, if that's right for a particular property. But I can come back with some more information from our retrofit team.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. So on place-based strategies, you talked about them being local authority led, which I'm very glad to hear, and thanks for that. Just two questions out of that. How does East Birmingham North Surrey Hull fit in that? So that's obviously a cross LA enterprise zone, whichever zone it is, they have too many different names. And I assume the CA is going to have to take some kind of leadership role in that between the two authorities. And the second is how you ensure that kind of there's a risk, and I've seen this in other places, that these could just end up being strategies about strategies. CA's got a strategy about a local government strategy. How are you ensuring the way your team works, that those strategies are very much delivery focused and just doesn't just become more paper about what are local authority strategies? Thank you.
Thank you. So that is a very good question, and then point of caution about too many strategies. So I know within Birmingham and Solihull's place-based strategies, East Birmingham also is identified as one of the areas that they want to focus on. I think when we have been going about this piece of work, we have tried to balance the fact that we can do things that are new through the integrated settlement, so we can invest, in different ways. We can bring things together in a way that we haven't been able to do before, because we've got more choice, things are aligned, whilst also wanting to build on what already exists. So I think place-based strategies, in some ways, they should help to amplify things that are already there. So the work on the EBNS, for example, and other strategies that Birmingham and Solihull have respectively. But I think what we're starting to see from next year, and this is referenced in section 2.17 of the paper, is that there are a couple of areas where we might where we can start to do things about place-based strategies next year. So we've got flexibility over skills funding, we've got some flexibility over active travel and electric vehicle infrastructure funding. There is some flexibility over the brownfield housing pipeline. So we have been really mindful of, well, where can we make a start on some of this? Or not make a start, because obviously the investment for a long time, but where can we start to do things differently? So we would hope by the 1st of April this year, we can show where the settlement is starting to help to make further progress on them. But the section on 2.17 gives a breakdown of where some of those practical things are that can start to happen soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just very quick supplementary on the back of that. Hearing terminology, flexibility quite a lot through all of this. With all that flexibility could come another level of bureaucracy, if you like. Are we going to end up in a position of all of this flexibility, none of it's going to get done? AKA, is there going to be a slowdown to get funds, all the investment lines to where they need to go to make the impacts?
So I'd say it will vary between the different subject areas. So I think if you look at the housing work that Ian talked about earlier, in some ways we have done quite a bit of work with local authorities to develop what our pipeline is for different schemes. So that work has got going, and that means we can then start to use the funding we've got to then ultimately deliver on the pipeline for housing schemes. And the same is true with adult skills and employment, where we have been funding colleges for a long time, and LAs, and delivered, I think, about £700 million worth of funding. So in some and with business support as well, that's an existing scheme that is up and running. So in some areas of the settlement where we deliver things, we are in effect resourcing an existing delivery model. So there is money kind of flowing into things that are already happening. I'd say there are a couple of areas where we do need to do more development work. So you always need to keep developing new housing schemes. The new retrofit funding we will get, the £167 million, is potentially a new area that will require more development work by local authorities and some by the CA. And when we, after 2026, receive the devolution of the successor funds to the levelling up fund and so on and so forth. There will need to be some development work there. So across the board, there will be some areas where we need to have good, robust plans, which I wouldn't use this term bureaucracy because it's more part of the process, but the actual systems that we need to support that. So how we do evaluation, how we do other types of kind of support activities. I think as part of the work we're doing on the transformation programme for the CA, that's an opportunity to look at what are the functions we need and what's the best way to do things here. So I know that's a bit of a roundabout answer to your question, but for delivering things on the ground, there are a number of things that are about keeping them going, you know, keeping the buses operation is would be one example, business support. For some areas, we do need to make sure we've got good proposals, and that does require a bit of development work. But yeah, your point's taken on what's the best way to set ourselves up as a CEO of the medium term to do that, which I know is on our lines.
Councillor Kettle, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You know, a few months ago, we were told there was in finance there was 1.4 billion on deposits for the business, and although that lump went down just before last year, now talking about 360 million. Is that per annum? So that's about, so the single settlement is talking over 4 years, and it's roughly the same money, a bit under allowing for inflation. Is that right?
So in terms of the 1.4 billion, was that the quantum of the integrated settlement? So I think for next year, it will be 360 million. There are a couple of extra funding lines to be announced. Skills boot camps, some transport funds. But that is just for next year. It's important to say that from 2026, we will then receive into the integrated settlement the funding allocation for the city region sustainable transport settlement. So that, if you add that in, would take it up to in the region of 570 million. But that assumes that's the same thing next year as this year. And then in future, if, as mentioned, the successors to the Levelling Up Fund, Shared Prosperity Fund, and so on, they come in, that would potentially be extra still. So we would imagine the figure to potentially grow over time. But I think what is really clear to say is that the integrated settlement doesn't represent all of the TA's resources. So there are, for example, you know, the transport levy is part of our budget, but doesn't come into the integrated settlement. So it will increase over time. I think we are always trying to negotiate with governments to say, you should keep the settlement scope as broad as you possibly can so that leaders and board have more choice or more resources. So I think the reason why it's probably changed and different is because it's an annual figure. The exact funds to be included are maybe different when we've had conversation.
Yes, but fundamentally it's the same money, isn't it? There ain't a lot of extra money, or it's virtually the same money.
That's right. Yeah.
Minus a bit of inflation.
So the funding we get for next year is just a gross budget. So it's not, I don't think the government has given us an inflationary uplift for next year. So
we'll agree, not we?
Unfortunately. So yes, is the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we have some more questions on the budget this afternoon. Councillor McKay.
Thanks very much. Actually, I had a question from someone who's watching online. So if you don't mind, I'll ask it. It may not massively fit with this, but I thought I'd ask it anyway. Bear in mind, if people watch, should ask their questions. The question was, apparently we've just had an all staff conference and they were asking how much of that to put on, and is that part of this budget? I don't know the ins and outs of any of that, by the way.
Yeah. No, it's definitely not part of that budget. That's part of my core budget as chief executive, and my decision to bring the stuff together. Not every year, but this year in particular, given the amount of changes and sort of challenges that we have, including the integrated settlement and the Devo deal. So no, that's formed out of my core budget.
How much that was? If it's confidential, I mean, that's fine.
It's not, but I don't have the number to hand, but I will get it to you. It's not a confidential number, but I would argue it's worth absolutely every penny.
Just asking.
Well, whatever number that is.
Councillor Bateman.
Just a simple one, really. This is obviously a big change for local authorities to put their heads around, as it will be for the very people we all sit and represent. So the question really is, what's the comms plan around these proposals as they are now? And all I would say in relation to that is they need to be often, and it needs to grab attention, because I'm just thinking about the people that will pay for all of that at the end of the day, those people that will go out and vote for us, and the like. There will be some confusions, as there is with anything relating to the West Midlands Combined Authority outside on the floor, because it is a complex part of local government. So for me, it's the issue about the comms. No matter what we decide, it's the issue about the comms plan, I think, is one of the keys.
Thank you, Councillor. So it's a really good question. We think about it within our team a lot on how to communicate this. I mean, yeah, residents would not be doing anything wrong by not understanding the plethora of things that we've been talking about here, the devolution deal, integrated settlement. It confuses us sometimes, so kind of bless them. I would say, in some ways, the integrated settlement just changes how we receive funding from government in some ways. I think what matters most to people and to an extent well, particularly to residents and businesses, is what are we actually then going to do with that funding? So what does it then mean on the ground? So what difference would it make to the travel schemes or business support schemes that we can fund? What difference does it make to the types of homes we can retrofit and how we do that? And I think that from the end of this month onwards, when we can start to communicate externally about how much money we will be getting for next year, is the approach we will start to take to explaining exactly what it means for people in terms of the different interventions we can fund, the different programs we can fund, as opposed to talking about the integrated settlement itself, because it is more of an abstract concept of it changes the funding source. But I think what people and communities and businesses will be interested in, well, what are you actually going to deliver with that? What are the schemes? And some of those types of programs are touched on in sections 2.8 downwards, when it talks about through transport, the different types of bus provision, cycling and walking infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So I think that will be mainly how we start to talk about it externally, is about what are the practical things that will come from it, as opposed to the kind of concept of the settlement itself. But open to others' feedback and ideas on that if you think it is worth more dwelling on.
I think that's a really good question. There are 470 councillors across the region, there or thereabouts. I think that's right. Do you believe that your colleagues back at the ranch understand this? Would a place to start be another of these online availabilities where people can have a presentation, a workshop, whatever you want to call it, on some of the aspects of this, but taking account of, can we actually get into some of the practicalities and not just the theory? Would that be helpful, do you think?
Chair, if I can just come back. I know as soon as I said something in relation to this, there would be, a stream of concentration about the size and the scope and the complexity. I'm aware of that. But, at the end of the day, we need to start as early as we can. And we'll have 5 years in which we'll make mistakes and we will make great decisions, I'm quite sure. But I still think the issue for the people outside is to be aware that this is taking place. I don't say how the comms should be formed or whatever, but I just make the point. It is an issue that should start here with us, as well as down at the bottom, and with local authorities also trying to do their bit. I'm still absolutely convinced in my own mind that in the scope of things, keeping people prepared and understanding that there's going to be change, and some of that change will be huge, some of it may not be. but not to say anything to them as we go away and wonder and scratch our heads ourselves about the implications. I think I'd feel happier knowing full well that we've got a comms plan being worked from day one, dealing with both the complex side of the issues and also maybe just the information sides. And Laura's here, and you'll know what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to describe everything, but I think we need to start as we go on, so that it's easy for us to follow. And also we create that audit trail that we've done from day one. And we recognise that at the end of the day, people who are going to get the services and the people that pay for the services may not be the same people, may not be scratching their heads and not quite understanding. Lots of them will. I think we often take, for example, that they won't know, so we won't tell them. You know, that's not the way forward, really.
I would just say it's an incredibly good point, and we'll pick it up. I understand exactly what you're saying, Councillor Bateman. And it is really important that we find a way to communicate what these changes mean to people. So we'll pick that up as part of the work. Thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Now, for the members of the public who need to understand this, those around this table understand technical jargon, but the members of the public don't understand technical jargon. And if we're going to get the message out to the people who really need to know, it needs to be simplified so as I can understand it. And at the moment, it isn't. Now, for instance, there was one councillor, we had officers from West Midlands Combined Authority coming to an overdue and scrutiny meeting, and questions were asked. And one of my colleagues didn't feel that he'd had the correct information given to him for what he asked, and it said he was going to get back to him. He didn't. They didn't get back to him on it. So I'm going to deal with that anyway. I'm going to take that one up. But sometimes we're sitting around this table and we understand what's being said. We know what we're talking about. But anybody, a member of the public, might be listening to this, is not going to understand it. So we really need to get some documents out there through social media so as people can see the simplified version. Oh, that's what it means. Oh, this is happening. Because I get asked a lot on things and I have to simplify them and explain things to people and what actually is going on. Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you both for that feedback. So we will factor that into the we are planning at the end of this month when the government will announce the total amount of funding for next year to put out a press release of some sort. But I think you've given us some extra food for thought there on how we can provide a bit more explanatory information about what it is. We'd be really happy to share that with the committee afterwards, if it's okay.
I think that would be very helpful. It's taken me 2.5 years to understand some of the alphabet soup we've got in terms of, and if nothing else, we can get away from that and start talking about the thing that people will understand automatically rather than think, what on earth do these 5 initials mean? So I'm looking forward to this. Are there any other comments? Councillor Kettle.
Mr. Chairman, and that is, we got used to the Euro sign, you know, the European blue ring with the stars on. I'm just wondering whether we need a logo, and just a logo and a contribution from the combined authority of X amount of money on every scheme. You know, we got used to the Euro. The thing, you go down the country and you see a road scheme or whatever. It's just an idea that if there is a direct contribution from the combined authority, go on then.
So in some cases, we do that on where we have hoardings. So if you, for example, see the bull in New Street Station, it's got our logo on it, our metros, the metro hoarding. So where there is a place that it is appropriate for that to be said, you know, partially funded by the West Midlands Combined Authority, we do, and we'll need to think about how we take that into the integrated settlement and into the kind of projects, but really also very keen that because they'll sit alongside the growth plans of each area, that whatever we do in terms of marketing and branding, promote both the local authority as well as the regional authority.
One question, maybe suggestion. This paper, in essence, is going to the board. Have I got that right? It's just, I'm not sure whether you've got the same page numbering as we have, page 36. But it's section 2.9. Item D talks about good quality education up to level 2 and 3. Do we include vocational skills in that? Or are we talking about GCSE kind of education?
Thank you, Chair. So from that point, up to level 2 includes a range of specific curriculum. The majority of it is geared towards vocational delivery. So if you have, for example, a level 2 in business administration delivered by a college across the region, that delivery will include not only core curriculum, but also there will be a very strong orientation towards vocational delivery in that place.
Can I make a suggestion that that is reworded so it comes that way? Because I know you'd actually do quite a lot of manual skills training as well, and a steel fixer will not view the training he's getting as education. So just a small thing, but to me, this is a really good paper because it focused my mind on what we're trying to do in an integrated way. So if you could take that on board, that would be helpful. Have we any other questions? So we make, is it 2 or 3 recommendations? We've got that one. We've got, can we have a comms program? Was there something else? I can't remember now.
There was the question about the heat network particulars that you mentioned.
Yes, there's a question as opposed to recommendations. Yes.
And was your, so I think there were 3, and then your final comment about the wording.
Yeah.
So we can. Yeah, and I think the 4th is we will come back in the start of March with the actual strategies, so you can read the rest of the review.
So we make those 2 recommendations. There's a request for information, and we ask for you to come back in March. Everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Thank you for your contribution and thank you for coming today. Now, it is a pity that Kathy is not here because she was really interested in this job rotation pilot, and that is why it's on the agenda. You're leading on that, are you? Lovely. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you the opportunity to talk about the job rotation pilot, which is something that we're very excited about. The paper that we've shared with you for this meeting very much is breaks down, I suppose, the model of the job rotation pilot, what we're looking to achieve through it, and how it will be implemented and progress to date. The intention is for us to have bring this back in a couple of months where we'll provide an evaluation of the actual impact of the job rotation pilot itself. So this is very much kind of setting the scene for a further meeting. The job rotation pilot is something that, to my knowledge, has never really been tested in the UK before. It's a Scandinavian initiative where it works with municipals, and it's about how we begin to work differently with employers. So often when we deliver employment support activity, it's about us engaging with the citizen, identifying where they want to progress, and then supporting them in terms of removing barriers to participation or engagement and connecting them with this employer. The job rotation pilot is very much an employer first initiative. So it's actually about us engaging with the employer, about identifying where their skills need is, what they then need to support them to be able to grow and diversify, utilising our devolved skills budget to then enable them to upskill the residents. And then prior to that, once that's been achieved and once we've identified what that skills need, then working with colleagues in relation to Job Centre Plus to then identify residents who might help kind of backfill those positions in a subsidised nature. So it's almost kind of like we will support the employer in terms of identifying the employee they're working with. We will upskill that individual, and for the period they're being upskilled, we will backfill their role through supporting someone to have a work experience placement that will actually be a significant impact to them, and not something that's just a case of them spending time with an organisation, but something where they're actually gaining. And one of the exciting things, particularly around this pilot where it's being tested, is actually for those individuals who have been unemployed and placed. They're looking at 70 to 80% of those individuals then being retained by that employer, which I think is a really good conversion rate when we look at other employment support initiatives. You're probably looking at 30 to 40% of those individuals being progressed into employment. So it's something that we're as I say, we're very excited about testing. It's something that we've only been able to do because of devolved funding for skills. So actually being able to connect local authority partners, DWP partners, DWP as well, along with the employers to create this kind of triage and network. The other thing that's really important as well as part of this offer is around the mentoring for the individual who happens to be unemployed. So helping them kind of have that progression right the way through the journey. It's been a really interesting kind of pilot to date. We've currently, the intention is to support 80 individuals who are unemployed, but equally support 80 individuals who are consequently employed to be upskilled. So 160 individuals in total that we are looking to work with. We're looking to do that over the course of the funding that we've secured from DWP. The pilot is very much around being delivered this financial year. So it's something that we're looking to draw to a completion, but equally look at how we explore extending this opportunity beyond that period as well, because I think it's something that it is very much around how we've worked with employees in a completely different way, which I think is something that's come from previous scrutiny conversations. When the skills funding paper was presented in terms of what we've done to date, I think one of the challenges that was set through your good selves was actually how we work with employees in a different way. And I think this is really kind of showcasing that. I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Tennant, then Councillor Mackay. That's okay. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. So I've got two questions. The first, you said you were aiming 80 people. The report says you've managed to place 31, and you're aiming to do it within the financial year window. That data is mid-November, so there's a bit of an information lag. Are you on track to get 80 people by the end of the financial year? The second question is around the people we are recruiting. How many of these are long-term unemployed? How many of these people are we managing to shift into the job market after a period out of it, as opposed to people who've just fallen out and may be able to get back in much easier themselves? Thank you.
So if I start off the answer, and then I'll pass to my colleague Ed in relation to very much heading this up operationally. In terms of the timelines that we are currently working to, you'll probably note from the paper that we commenced I suppose we started the operational delivery in October. So obviously those 31 individuals were placed across the first 2 months of the delivery. We've secured in terms of, because the hardest piece of work in relation to this is actually getting the employers engaged and wanting to work with us. So we've secured the requisite number of placements to ensure that we've got the good opportunities to place. You're absolutely right in relation to the lag in data. And I don't know if, Ed, you've got anything, I suppose, more up to date in terms of numbers at this point.
Thank you, John. Councillor Tennant. So in overall terms, we are on schedule to achieve all of those outcomes. The key, as John's pointed out, this is essentially now in 2 phases. There's pre-Christmas sort of like delivery from October and perhaps a bit before. We had an event to basically for employers in the first place to basically raise interest in it and put names forward from that. That's been successful. I'm very confident that with the employers that we've got in place, that we are going to be in a situation to achieve all of those outcomes in the second period. it's kind of broken down that way because it's before and after Christmas, and that's the way the partnership developed. Has agreed to do that in that space as well. Your sub question or second question about those long-term unemployed people, they are majoritatively long-term unemployed. I think that's very exciting for us, principally because, as John has pointed out, if you look at current employment support programs, the outcomes from those and the percentages in that place are quite small and not as high as John has quoted either. So if we can get this right as a model and with recommendations that come out of it, alongside the evaluation which we have commissioned as part of this, then it's really exciting. There's nothing like this going on in the country, which is also exciting. So it's down to us to sort of like, once we get it all through and the outcomes and the outputs are coming through, you know, we're going to be in a situation where we should be waving flags and all sorts of it in that space to advocate it on a wide delivery basis, along, of course, with local authority colleagues as well.
Thank you.
Councillor McKee.
Thanks very much. And you actually, well, I've got to rephrase my question, because my question was going to be where in the UK has done this, and how many got jobs and were still employed in 6 months' time. And obviously the answer to that is nowhere. So because, I mean, obviously it's supportive of anything that improves skills, but obviously what we want to see is not only people that get skills will get a job and then 6 months' time have still got a job and have stayed with it. And so what does success look like that we will then at the end of this say this has worked? Because obviously it's very easy to do it and then retrospectively look at the data and say it's a success because of whatever. But what are we aiming for with this sort of scheme?
I'll pick up first, but everyone will welcome to chip in. I suppose there's two elements to this. Firstly, there's a test and learn piece. So actually, for us to create and start thinking in terms of ecosystems, and actually could we get employers, local authorities, DWP, our skills to create an ecosystem where this model actually works, for me is the first trigger of success, because ultimately then it's around how we tweak, how we fund. In terms of, I suppose, getting to the crux of it, in terms of conversion rate, I would hope that we are, at least in the first throes of this, is we are surpassing some of those levels that have come through some of those employment support models that I've mentioned previously. I don't expect us, or indeed I probably would challenge us to say, actually, can we get to that 70%, 80%? But it is one in terms of, it's about us utilising the first year of this to really understand the employers' opportunity that we can both impact positively and equally in terms of those residents that we're supporting to connect with these opportunities. I think the learning from this is almost as important as the conversion rate, but the conversion rate is really important because that's what's going to allow us to draw down more funding to be able to do this again.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. The other thing just occurred to me when listening to that is because come across a few of these things in the past, and obviously sometimes you get these jobs, then you look at the cost per job, you know, how much it costs to do this. Are we confident that this will give us a good return? I mean, any jobs, you know, there's more to it than that, but are we happy with what it delivers is good use of the funding, etc.?
And I think this is why it's important in relation to the evaluation, as Ed rightly pointed out, to look at this, because I think in terms of, we look at cost saving, it's obviously moving individuals from being reliant on benefit. Those individuals that are supported and being upskilled, and one of the things that I probably should have pointed out, actually, if we look at the current claimant count, it's a significant proportion of the claimant count at the moment is made of those individuals who actually are I say lowly paid, are those individuals that aren't earning enough to be on the threshold that gives them full independence. And thirdly, it's then around the difference it's making to those businesses in relation to their growth, their diversification, and all of those sorts of elements. So the evaluation should really tie in those three things. The other thing that's particularly interesting as a piece of learning, because we've offered this as a subsidised work placement opportunity. Not always those employers have sought to have that subsidy. So actually, some of the individuals that are going through this, it's been around it's supported the employer, almost the subsidies brought the employer to the table. But in many respects, it's about them having the right individual to support their organisation. So what we might see in relation to the evaluation again is that difference between some individuals going through this and where there's not been a subsidy attached. Actually, that's a lower, apologies, I'll use the word unit cost, but that's lower in relation to that. Whereas other elements, as I say, might have subsidies. So we might actually find that it's a more efficient or financially efficient delivery than some of the totals that are coming in, but we'll only know that in terms of once we understand that subsidy uptake.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. In this programme, are they looking at the mental well-being of the long-term unemployed? Because I mean, I actually, in a previous life, I actually worked on a team that dealt with this kind of thing, and we actually tried to deal with their mental well-being before we started to try and get them into getting themselves back into work, because when they're long-term unemployed, it means they've got I'm going to say this, get themselves into a rut of depression, anxiety and all that about going back to work. So it does need that putting in place before you can actually start and work with them on education to get them back into work. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for that observation. If I was basically receiving universal credit at the moment, the process would be one of encouragement to be involved with this as part of my 2-weekly sort of like engagement with my work coach. If I'm taking interest, the full raft of offer is offered to me in that space, and it does include that particular part of wraparound support in common parlance. So we're very keen, as John's said, just in terms of learning that comes out of it, to actually see again how this works as part of the whole thing, how significant it is as part of that component in that place, alongside everything else that's going forward in that. I think it's very interesting as well, just coming back to your point previously, Councillor, about cost. The cost is exacerbated by the basically the wage subsidy at the moment. What is interesting is that when we had our sort of like opening event for this, where it was literally an invitation to become part of a pilot, that's the way it was stated. The interesting thing with that was that we had several employers who came out and said very keenly, look, we're not interested in the money, we're interested in the concept and how because they're interested in getting the right person. And this is very important for us to ensure that we have that, pinpoint accuracy with that within that situation. And then the other element that is coming increasingly more apparent that comes out of it is that employers, bless them, we're all working together on this as a region. It's the knowledge they've now gained about what is actually available to them in terms of the training offer, the skills offer that goes with that. Because we should be doing more in that space, generally speaking. To do that, and I think that's really been a valuable insight into that. Apprenticeship's fine, that's all kind of like doing in that space. Then after that, it's free courses for jobs, for example, free level 2 offer, it's so on and so forth in that space. So
can I come back? That's a really good point. I mean, businesses generally are busy doing their business, and sort of, and even if you read these headlines, we sit here looking at these reports and yes, wonderful. But I mean, obviously for a business, even if they want someone, where do they look? Where do they find it? Where they don't say, it's an excellent point. Thanks.
Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. And whether this is a semi-declaration of interest at the start, but obviously I'm Coventry, so been down to the job shop on a number of occasions. And when this scheme first came about, I did take a spike of interest, I must admit. And apologies, all I've got is your name is guest Wi-Fi. So
We'll keep it at that then.
but you actually covered part of what I was going to say, and just around the actual benefit to the employer, because I did have a quick conversation with JLR, and they've put forward, they've got a couple, etc., and they're loving it. They're seeing it as a new route of getting a new branch of people through, which they might have normally missed. And a couple of pushes, I suppose. And as I said, I am from Coventry, so I'll be fighting for every penny where I can. Scandinavia, when they started this in the 80s, they took a 3-year pilot on before we got anywhere. Are we confident that within 1 year we're going to have the figures that we're going to need to prove the case for it? That's part one. Part two, just on that employers line, after doing a dig and finding out what employers we're actually approaching to be part of this, we haven't really targeted SMEs. So within Coventry, the SME side of business, loads of jobs. We're begging for people to go into that role. And then the big, I suppose, the kill question is the over 50 and then the over 18 plus side that we're trying to target. Just in Coventry, the most unemployed is 32. So the age bracket of 32 isn't a target, whereas that's where we know most unemployed folk are. Why would that not have a localized single look into, and would that be something, should we go for another pilot or should the scheme come into play, we could tailor locally or obviously as the authority?
Right, so last point first, if that's okay. Yes, we are. This pilot originally was aimed to be 2 years, for example. The funding that we had available from DWP within their particular, it was basically their in-work progression unit. Very interested in it, which was great. The original proposal was 2 years, but the funding could only cover 1 year of that. So we've gone with that to develop our sort of like delivery and understanding in that space. We will be, in crude terms, gunning for more, as we move forward. And that's what we want to do. I think that there is enough traction with this anyway to start developing and formulating something that moves forward as part of post 25 and also incorporated in our employment and skills strategy in that place, because the response from employers, generally speaking, I think has been really good. JLR's big one's been mentioned there. We have got some SMEs in this space onto the pilot. I think our challenge was the time to deliver this, bearing in mind it's not excuses, it's just practical reality, I'm afraid. There was obviously a national election in that space. There was one here for a new incumbent mayor. So we kind of struggled a bit to get things mobilised and started. The links to Coventry employers have mainly been through the local Coventry delivery sort of like partnership in that place. And it comes back to those as well, I think, that actually have not only expressed an interest, actually want to do it as a consequence. So I know definitely that Coventry employment and skills colleagues have continually approached SMEs to get them involved, but they've got to bite, they've got to take part in it, and that's fine. What I'm hoping as a result of this is Coventry, as well as in other areas, employers see the real value of it, and they're coming back and they're saying, oh, can we have some more? Can we have some more? Not necessarily the same ones. My competitors, my rivals did this. What about that? And I think there's a great sort of like communication piece to be done as well at Coventry Employment and Skills Board, for example, linking in with Coventry Growth Board or equivalent, in that space to start advocating this moving forward. Does they answer your questions? Have I missed one?
Just, sorry, through you, Chair. And the 3-year pilot for Scandinavia,
Yes.
compared to obviously the 1 year, completely get funding and other aspects to that. Is there a mechanism that we could go back, and it doesn't have to be Coventry, it could be anywhere,
Yeah.
because I have seen full value in this project. And just to comment very quickly, Chair, while I've got the floor if I may. And one of my friends / residents in the ward that I represent has actually gone through this programme. And I have had quick conversations with him obviously today. He's loving it. And he's been unemployed for 3 years. He's got into a job. The big bit, and it does touch within the EIA, is he's actually got autism.
Okay.
And we're not actually put anything in here around that. And so it is another plus on the back of all of the report that we've got in front of us, we've sort of missed. And the final bit is just around that comms. The first I found out about this was through my friend. It wasn't on our council's website, or it wasn't on advertised massively at the job shop. It wasn't really on the combined authority sheets anywhere.
Okay.
And then the second note I get of it is obviously this paper in front of us. So when you've mentioned comms, it'd be really interesting to see a kick to try and publicise the final outcomes from it, because I believe they are going to be very positive.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I do apologise. Thanks very much for that. That's great and really insightful. We are hoping as a result of this, we have other cases, that are able to be put forward as part of this to show the range of individual that's come through it, and also the success that they've achieved individually, as well as the employers advocating that in that space. That will be something that we really want to look at. And also, I'm anticipating, I take your point, John has obviously referred, this is almost like a position statement at the moment. The report that comes back to you in March, April, May, later on this year, will have quite a lot of more insight and detail, and maybe examples like that for you to scrutinise. Yes. Thank you, Chair. Sorry.
I'm very happy with the free flow. I just need, before getting to the point I want to make, I just want to understand that I understand the scheme properly. So what you've got is somebody that's doing a relatively low-level job who's got potential, and the employer think, well, if I could spring them for 6 months to go and do this training program, I can backfill them with somebody who's unemployed. That's the model. Do we fund, or can that employer apply for supported funding for the training for that current employee who are upskilling? Is that in the model as well? Because I assume that's not in the 740,000, that's in a different part, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. There's obviously a reference about our devolved skills funding. So obviously, in terms of the different vocational skills that we offer through our skills training, it's around our opportunity to align our current providers, local authorities and colleges with that employer to make that level of connection. So it is something that those employers can access, and as I say, really supports that conversation around ecosystem as opposed to individual projects.
I mean, that's great. So I now come to my question and request, really. My very rough sum says it costs us about £9,000 to get somebody into a job through this. That's taking out the evaluation costs and assuming an 80% success rate. We have other schemes. I mean, I saw a scheme at a training centre near, I'm going to call it Dickens Heath, because it's actually across the border somewhere else on construction skills. That had a 60% success rate. I think these are complementary, and we need a range of different schemes. Is it possible when you do your evaluation to look at how much this costs versus how much that costs versus what other things that you've got? Could we actually see those numbers? Because I think that would be, 10 grand to me to get somebody who's been unemployed for 3 years into a job. I mean, housing allowance is more than that. It looks like a good payback to me, but to have those numbers and compare those to the other schemes that we're operating, I think would certainly help me. And I'm getting nods around the table. So, because if this works, it's another arrow in the quiver.
Yes.
It's not either or. We ought to be doing both. Would be my view.
Chair, I absolutely agree. Sorry, I'm flashing green.
Turn one of the mics.
Councillor Kendall, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I absolutely agree, and yes, you're right in terms of the various costs. And I think that's why it's really important with these initiatives that it's about the right intervention for the right person in the same breath. And it goes back to points that one earlier. If this is about an individual who's recently being made redundant, then that isn't necessarily the right scheme, and therefore the example about the individual that had autism is really important because of that level of wraparound support that's available. But it's certainly something that we've got knowledge of and can build in. And you're right, it's about creating different interventions for different residents.
Two further thoughts. In Solihull, we did a task and finish group looking at hard to place individuals into work. The hotel chains, there was a hotel chain who suddenly worked out that getting people with, I'm pretty sure it was autism, to come and work for them worked really well, because a lot of their jobs were a task that an individual does on their own, and hopefully we can have this as a very broad thing to actually approach, to get people with neurodiversity to actually struggle sometimes to get into appropriate work. And if we can have that as one of the objectives of this, I see that as very, very helpful. I mean, there's a range of reasons why people are unemployed, but certainly some people have a harder start in life than others. And if we could have that as one of the objectives, that would be really good. And the other point, I don't know whether councillors would agree with me, I would prefer this scheme is kept in Coventry and we learn all the lessons by doing year 2 and 3, if that is the best way of proving it really works and us getting long-term funding. To go too soon to spreading this out, to me, is not a... I've seen so many schemes crash and burn because we don't do the pilots for long enough. And I think it's interesting that Councillor Lloyd highlighted that the Scandinavians did it for 3 years. It doesn't surprise me because they tend to be relatively thorough as governmental culture. I don't know if other people have that view, but it would mean that other places don't get in quite so quick. Councillor Kettle.
Thank you. I'm quite pleased with what I've heard and quite enthusiastic that anything that would help the long-term unemployed. And the word triage, as you mentioned, where does this lead to? And I was just wondering whether, given it, because of the employment costs and selection costs now can be so considerable, and I've heard employers when they've told me what they've actually spent and got nothing. Believe it or not, in recent years, with unemployment as it is, some employers spend a considerable amount of money every year on trying to get the right people. Do we offer them a selection of people, and can it ultimately lead to the use of the apprentice levy? When you say triage, where do we ultimately, when we get somewhere and we've got a decent prospect, they can lead on to extra training, and maybe the apprentice levy will kick in at some point, which will again be useful and put more bones on the scheme in a way.
Councillor, I don't disagree. And I think the apprenticeship levy is probably, we're talking about the devolved skills funds, but equally apprenticeship levy is absolutely right in ways in which those organisations can upskill their employees as well. But equally, it's really important that we're empowering those employers to release people and to embrace training to help them move up, and equally that connection in supporting them to backfill and maintain their level of levels of efficiency is also really important. So that's certainly something we can explore.
If I can draw this item to a close, because I think, John, we've got you on the all-age career strategy, and I know quite a few people are very interested in that. So are people comfortable to move on? We only have to note, and then we we're requesting you'll come back in May, which you already know. So thank you very much. So if we can move on to the all-age career strategy, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Ed, thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know why I waited until you left right out the door as if this is a confidential piece I was going through. Yeah, we're presenting a paper. Once again, this is something that's been previously requested through this committee. Where what we've tried to do is really reflect on the complexity and the fragmentation of the current careers delivery that's available to our residents. So I think it's really interesting when we look at the journeys that our residents take from school to being employed, and the fact that within this paper reflects on the fact that actually throughout their journey, there is no one organisation that has responsibility or accountability for the management of that journey right the way through. So one of the diagrams, I think it's around 4.8, during the paper, I think is really interesting one to reflect on actually the number of organisations that are involved, whether that's at earlier age through local authority engagement with schools, whether that's then in terms of the slightly older offer or the adult offer that comes through Job Centre Plus or through National Careers Service. It's a number of organisations that take part. The other thing that I think it's important to note in this paper is actually what the combined authority's role and current responsibility is within the careers space as well. So what we have or what we are accountable for is the careers hubs that are funded through the CEC. So it was something that was formerly part of the statutory nature of LEPs, local enterprise partnerships, and it's one where through funding currently through the CEC, who are funded themselves by the Department for Education, we're in a position where we are supporting our schools in relation to having better access to LMI, having better access to employers, and working with them to support that level of careers interventions within school. Since that's been transferred from the LEPs to the combined authority, one of the things that we've been really keen to do is take a place-based approach in relation to how we're supporting those schools. It's not something that we can make schools engage with. It's something that through kind of discussion and conversation, we invite them to want to be part of this. And it's around giving them the tools to offer a better intervention at those schools. I think the other key element of those careers hubs, or what we do with that funding, is around the cornerstone employer group that the paper also references. So this is about how we actually identify employers and help them better connect with the schools. And fundamentally, I think one of the key parts of that is how we actually support the improvement in terms of what work experience looks like within schools as well. And I think one of the things the paper also highlights is the pilot that we're currently doing in relation to Equilux, which is a CEC product, but actually that's around looking at a work experience in intervention, and it shouldn't just be around a young person having to find that placement themselves, how it ends up with being potentially friends or family or people off the same list. And certainly it's one of those where I'm sure schools feel a certain amount of pressure to go through that process, but actually how can you take components from different employers to actually create a better experience for those individuals to support them in terms of what their next steps might look like. And then finally, because I appreciate there'll be a number of questions in relation to this, the paper also starts to discuss how we might start convening some of these organisations to begin to work together around the role of data and around how that's really important between those organisations. We begin to have that discussion around how we can better connect and understand that journey. The other thing everyone's getting to my very, very final note in relation to this, is one of the reasons that we deferred this from previous meetings, because it was due to come to this committee late last year, is as part of the Get Britain Back working paper. There has been a note around the development of a combined National Career Service and Job Centre Plus pilot. Currently, there is no detail, but that will fundamentally change the way, or has potential to fundamentally change the way careers interventions are given to those individuals who are 18 plus. So it's something that we're being very mindful of at this point, and as I say, are very much awaiting to see what that looks like. And in terms of our functional skills statement around how we work with DWP, it's one of those things we're trying to incorporate to make sure that we have a good level of influence over what that might look like. But I'll yield the floor to any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Walters.
Thank you, Chair. Now, some time ago, I actually mentioned this. As a school in Warsaw, there is actually doing the work experience before they take their options. It's one case study I actually observed was the girl thought she knew what she wanted to go into, but when she'd done the work experience, it was like, no, I don't want to do that. So when she took her options, that meant that she knew that was what not a focus was, where a focus was going to be. And it does help, because I mean, in my day, it was a case of you done your work experience just before you went into work, when you'd already took your options. So, but there's one issue with the fact we've got a lot of academies, and they are funded partly by the council and stuff. But however, they are on their own. They are not exactly tied in with council. So there's things that councils can and can't do to encourage this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd say it's an excellent point, and I, absolutely agree that the role of work experience in relation to when young people have to make decisions is absolutely key in terms of how we do that. I think it'd be interesting for us to go in terms of paper references that we've got 96 schools that we've targeted in particular this year. So all schools get a careers hub service, but we've targeted 96 for almost an amplified offer. It'd be interesting for me to cross-reference that list against those academies, which is certainly an action I'll take from this.
Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a point I've raised before on this committee. So within the skills and education whole thing across the West Midlands, we do see a lot of duplication, sometimes even within combined authority funded programs that seem to be competing against each other in the same quite small geographical areas. So how are we ensuring from the strategy that in order to deliver value for money, we're not competing with ourselves, but also competing with local authority delivered programs or DWP delivered programs around careers advice? Because it just seems a useless waste of money if we are.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think it's a really interesting point around duplication. I think where that duplication currently exists, or probably there's a greater risk of it, is probably in terms of adult careers interventions between the National Careers Service, DWP, and even with the Combined Authority own skills interventions, there is always information, advice and guidance that's at the front end of that delivery. So I think there's certainly a really important piece in terms of how we better align the resident journey in relation to all of those three different organisations. I think there's the role in terms of the Combined Authority in relation to this place is really around that convening. Obviously, the Careers Hub doesn't necessarily duplicate because there's no direct one-to-one activity with residents as part of that. It's more about improving kind of the skills interventions. But I think it's a good note in relation to I suppose how we develop those routeways or those opportunities for those residents without having that level of duplication. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this a thing you think that ought to be decentralised more?
Absolutely.
Just set the question up, yeah.
I think the frustration, as I say, it's one where the more, I suppose, the more money, more, I say, if this was something that came through the integrated settlement, as we spoke about earlier, it'd be a real opportunity in terms of how we could begin to look at that level of alignment. The risk that we have at the moment, and I say it's a risk, but the way in which the operating model is that DFE will set the CEC some level of guidelines. We get those guidelines from the CEC to say this is what you're going to do with that money. And then there's other money going elsewhere to different people to deliver different things. If it goes into a central pot, which is the whole point of devolution, there's a better conversation then in terms of how you stop duplication, because you then can also get everything, all your ducks in a row to be able to deliver it. But at this point, whilst we're, still building in that space, convening is going to be the way forward, to be working better with partners to create these routeways.
So your strategy is do the bits that we've got very well, then see if we can use it as a basis for a more rational approach.
Absolutely. It's about working more effectively with the individuals or organisations that are doing this. It's about making sure that there is a better way of communicating this offer through to our residents. And then thirdly, it's around what the combined National Careers Service and Job Centre Plus offer looks like and how we get it to work better for West Midlands residents.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I've found that very helpful, and I think it's answered Councillor Kettle's question from 2 or 3 meetings ago, which I think you raised the confusion, shall I say, within this whole area. Yes. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
8, grant register. Is there anything you would like to say over and above what's in the paper?
No, absolutely, yeah. I think over and above what's in the paper.
Does anyone have any questions? I've got one. On 4.3, you say we've got another 2.6 million from an alphabet soup. What is that for? We apply for a grant, do we, to do a specific project?
Yeah, well, it's a Homes on Play grant, so it's kind of part of the work around retrofitting effectively. So we've had funds for retrofit before, and this was a further chunk of cash for 24, 25 now. So a further chunk of cash effectively that would sort of bridge this financial year. And then obviously for 25, 26, we move into the integrated settle area. We have the whole pillar of money for that. So yeah, it's retrofitting.
I couldn't understand why we had a specific grant when we were going into the integrated settlement. It's in a bridge.
It's a timing. So the reason it has come in so late in this financial year is we have been discussing with government the terms and conditions, because the original ones we felt, particularly with discussion with the people that would be delivering it, would be undeliverable effectively. So we have been negotiating those.
Thank you. Move on to the work programme. Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so included within your pack, you have the forward plan for WMCA board and the work programme for this committee. Following a review of this committee's work programme and a conversation with yourself, Chair, and Vice Chair, it was thought, given the number of items left to consider for the remainder of this year, an additional meeting of the committee would be useful. And it was suggested the 9th of May as a potential date.
And that would handle specifically final evaluation of the job rotation, which I think we're all pretty keen on, and the regional energy strategy. There could well be other things once we've decided, well, we've decided what our work programme is, and the officers might have one or two papers they might want us to consider as well. But it struck me as sensible that we don't try and cram too much into individual meetings, but it does mean we have to have an additional meeting. I think normally we'd have one in July. Is that normally the first one?
That's correct, Chair. The first meeting of the municipal year is usually held in July.
Is everybody comfortable with an additional meeting in May?
Good, you know, I am.
We've got, I mean, I've got down a proposed full council meeting for us on the 20th. I mean, I don't necessarily feel that rules it out, but having said that, May's like 5 months away, isn't it? So I don't know, but I don't know what Councillor Tennant thinks.
I was going to say, nothing's not appeared in my diary, so.
Yeah.
I think Walsall have got an evening meeting on the 19th.
We've got the evening
yeah.
meeting on that day, so it's absolutely fine.
I think, Mr. Chairman, that if we had a meeting in July, being as we're going really into the holiday season for many people, the earlier in July, the better.
We don't have the dates yet, do we? So, but if you could bear that in mind. Yes.
We will.
Lindsay.
Thank you. I think we've then agreed that. So our next meeting is March the, when are we? The 3rd of March, 10 o'clock here. Thank
And
you.
as a reminder, we've also got the Q&A, the mayoral Q&A on the proposed draft budget on the 27th of January.